Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
I pushed into Tessa's new corner office, and the brass plate hit like a shove. Tessa Cole, president. She didn't even look up. Mason, cancel the 9:30. I have bigger fires. I stood there with a binder I'd bled over and felt stupid for caring. My name is Mason Cole. I was 34. I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. I still believed if I worked harder, things would line up. That morning told me I was wrong. I prepped 3 late nights for that staff meeting, I said. 12 people are ready to pitch fixes on 3 stalled builds. It matters. She flicked a hand like I was a courier. Not today. People have been rehearsing all week. Her eyes cut up, flat and sharp. It's not a request, Mason. Kill it. I swallowed, turned, and walked out. The glass wall felt cold through my shirt when I leaned on it to keep my head from exploding. Martin caught me there. Her dad, the founder, the man who built this place from one truck and a rented storage unit. You look like you just ate a nail, son. What did she do now? New roll pressure, I said, keeping it neutral. He frowned, heavy. Stress doesn't give you license to act like a tyrant. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. I went back in just to drop the agenda packet on her credenza. Her phone lit on speaker. Her voice flipped, warm and sweet, like a switch. Colin, hey. Lunch at the River House? Perfect. I can't wait. My feet stuck to the floor. Colin wasn't a client I knew. The smile in her voice didn't belong in a calendar invite. She noticed me in the doorway and scowled. You still standing there? I killed the meeting. The bullpen went quiet when I told them. Faces fell. Keegan, our design lead, stared at the floor. We put 3 weeks into this. For nothing? I know, I said, because anything else would make me sound like a fool. We'll regroup. They nodded because there was nothing else to do. By noon, Tessa breezed out like a commercial. Perfume heavy, jacket over her shoulder, phone to her ear, eyes miles away. Not a word to the crew, she'd just steamrolled. I buried myself in site updates, chased 2 permits no one wanted to sign, and tried to keep 3 plates from hitting concrete. Every email felt like a leak I was plugging with a thumb. Martin stopped by again around 4. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen since his chemo scare years back. She skipped the Henderson call, he said. Did you cover it? I covered it, I said. He winced. You shouldn't have to. At 6:20, Tessa came back like the day had gone great. Lipstick looked fresher than when she'd left. She didn't break stride. Reschedule Gardner to next week, she said, brushing past me. No thanks. No good work. Just orders thrown over a shoulder. In the garage, I sat in my truck while the radio mumbled weather and traffic. I'd married a builder with a backbone. Lately, she sounded like someone chasing a rush. I stared at the wheel until the rubber imprint pressed into my palms. My phone buzzed. 2 texts from a site super about a delivery screw-up. I called, sorted the forklift access, and rerouted the pallet. Same old drill. The problem wasn't the work. It was the games. I started the engine. The name from that call scraped across my mind like a piece of metal under a tire. Colin Red. I didn't like how it sat in my chest. I threw the truck into drive and rolled out of the garage. I got in before 7 the next morning, hoping to get ahead of the mess before it grew legs. The bullpen went quiet the second I walked through, that stiff smile people give when they're bracing for bad news. Monitors glowed, coffee steamed, and no one said what they were thinking. It felt like stepping onto a floor that had fire underneath it and everyone pretending their shoes weren't hot. Keegan slid a thick folder onto my desk and didn't sit. He didn't need a speech. Inside was a formal complaint from the site teams. Missed approvals, last-minute changes, Tessa skipping reviews. There were 12 signatures. 2 project managers added notes in sharp, tired handwriting that looked like they'd written them in their trucks at red lights. I flipped pages until the edges rasped my thumb, and then I carried the folder into her office. She skimmed 1 page and laughed under her breath like it was a joke she'd already heard. If they can't handle pace, we'll find folks who can, she said, eyes on the document but not seeing any of it. The air in that office had the cold shine of the skyline stamped on it, and she stared past me at the glass like I was a reflection you wipe off. "These guys got us through 2 winters under budget," I said, planting the folder on her desk so it thunked. "They're not soft. They're drowning." I wanted her to meet me in the middle for once. She didn't blink. She kept looking at the view, like downtown was going to hand her the answer if she stared hard enough. Her phone chimed, and her whole face lit like a switch thrown. "Hold my calls. I'm out for an early lunch," she said, already sliding her bag onto her shoulder. It was 11:05. We had a client at 1:15 with questions that could eat us alive if we dodged them. "Move it," she added, like I was blocking a door she needed. In the hall, Martin found me, and it hit me how tired he looked in a way I hadn't seen since his chemo scare 6 years back. His eyes did a once-over like he was counting bruises I couldn't see. "She won't hear me," he said, voice low. "Maybe she'll hear you." I told him about the complaint, the signatures, the notes. His jaw tightened until the muscle ticked. I didn't build this place on fear. I wanted to remind him who handed her the keys without breaks, but I swallowed it because I still needed him. At noon, I parked 2 blocks off the river house and watched, feeling like a creep in my own life. I needed to know which line had already been crossed. Tessa walked in with a guy in a slate jacket and no tie, easy smile, hand at her back like he'd been practicing it. He was the same one from the voice on speaker, the one she sounded different for. I snapped a photo I hated myself for taking. It wasn't proof of anything except closeness that didn't belong at work, and that was enough to rot your gut. I drove away pissed at her for making me that guy, and pissed at myself for doing it anyway. Back at the office, the day hit like a wave. Gardner threatened penalties over a delayed pour that would knock our schedule sideways if we didn't fix it by Friday. Maple and Finch wanted a redesigned price cut like we'd made a hobby out of giving money away. A vendor invoice for $92,000 sat in my inbox with an approval stamped by Tessa without my review, and the backup attachments were missing like they'd never existed. I kept the phone glued to my ear and the inbox moving, pushing drywall here, pulling rebar there, trying to make the puzzle fit while the pieces kept changing shape. Rico from finance drifted by and waited until my call ended. He didn't do the small talk thing. "There's a run of late-night expense entries tied to a new vendor. Red advisory," he said, keeping his voice down. "It's all coded strategic. You know them?" I didn't, and the name sat wrong in my chest. I asked for the ledger. Rico nodded once. "I'll print the last 60 days. You should see it yourself." He leaned in a shade closer. "Watch your back." It wasn't dramatic. It was something a man says when he's seen enough to know the ground is shifting. At 4:10, Tessa messaged me like she was ordering lunch. "Wheels up for Boston tomorrow. New opportunity." "Cover me," I typed, asked who she was meeting, and watched the 3 dots refuse to show. No reply. Just a pulse in my temple and a calendar that would bleed if I didn't stitch it. I skipped dinner and drove to my nephew's Little League field because tossing grounders is one of the few things that shuts the noise off. The smell of cut grass and dust on leather did their job for a while. Kids laughed, a bat cracked, and a dad in boots cheered like it mattered more than mortgages. I fed hopper after hopper, kept the throws low, and felt my breathing even out until I realized I was staring at my phone between drills like logic might text me back. It didn't, and I hated the small hope that kept popping up anyway. When practice wrapped, I dropped my nephew at my sister's, nodded at the casserole waiting on their counter that no one had asked me to stay for, and drove home with the radio low. The house felt staged, clean in a way that meant no one had cooked in it. I stretched out on the couch because the bed upstairs felt like a room I didn't have a key to anymore. The cushions swallowed my shoulders in a way that made me feel like furniture. She came in after 11, door clicking, heels soft on the entry rug, and she smelled like a bar I used to bounce at in my 20s. Expensive perfume laid over liquor, and a laugh that didn't belong in a conference room. She slid past me, phone in hand, eyes on nothing I could recognize. I asked nothing. My mouth felt like I'd chewed chalk. I said nothing, and the silence felt like I'd agreed to something I hated. She turned down the hall without looking back, and I grabbed the couch throw, pulled it over my chest, and rolled to face the cushions. I got maybe 2 hours of real sleep before the alarm chewed through the quiet. I showered, put on the same work shirt from the chair, and went in like muscle memory could carry me. By noon, I was done pretending. I told the receptionist I had a permit pickup and walked out with my gut tight and my keys already in my hand. The drive home felt shorter than usual, like the road knew I was about to do something stupid and wanted me to get it over with. I cracked the door and heard voices. Low, easy, not a speakerphone. A man laughed from the kitchen, that relaxed sound people make when they think they belong. I set my keys down as quiet as I could and walked in, every step loud in my head. The light hit the island just right, the fruit bowl was full, and the smell of citrus cleaner made the whole thing feel staged. He was taller than me by an inch, late 30s, careful stubble, the same guy from the river house. He had his hand on the back of one of our stools like he owned it, posture loose, eyes taking inventory. He didn't flinch when I appeared. That told me he'd already decided what I was in this room. Tessa turned like I'd barged into her office, not our kitchen. "Mason, you're home early." No shame, no surprise, just that clipped annoyance she saved for people who got in her way. Her glass sat on the counter with a lemon slice floating like a prop. "You must be Colin," I said. He stuck a hand out like we were at a chamber breakfast. I didn't take it. He held it a second, then tucked it into his pocket with a little smile that made my knuckles itch. Tessa's tone went corporate, vowels smoothed out. "Colin's consulting on the coal transit bid. He's helped firms land deals twice our size." She said it like a resume line that would erase everything else in the room if I just nodded along. "At home?" I asked. "Middle of a workday?" She rolled her eyes like I'd asked how to send an email. "It's called hustle," she said, and the word sounded like a dare. Colin set his portfolio on the island and straightened it like he was resetting a chessboard. "We were just wrapping," he said, still pleasant, like nothing here was personal. He grabbed the portfolio, gave me a polite nod that made me want to break something, and slipped through the side door like he'd used it before. The latch clicked gentle, familiar, like the door knew him. When it clicked shut, Tessa dropped the company tone and let the steel show. "Don't start, Mason. You've been dragging your feet for months. I'm fixing the future." She lifted her glass and took a sip like she'd earned the right to lecture me in our kitchen. "By what?" I asked. "Hiring a consultant you're hand-holding in our kitchen at 2 p.m.? Skipping your team? Burning overnight approvals like matches?" My voice didn't rise. It just landed, heavy on the tile. She looked me dead in the face, eyes flat. "You don't get what it takes to lead." No apology, no denial, no interest in what it cost other people. Something in me went cold and quiet. I grabbed my jacket off the chair. "I'm taking a drive." She didn't follow, didn't ask where, didn't even set down the glass. She poured herself another like this was maintenance and not a blowout. In the truck, I called Martin. He answered on the third ring, voice low like he was bracing for a hit. I told him everything. Colin in the kitchen, the tone change, the invoices I couldn't tie to work product, minus the part where I wanted to put my fist through drywall. I kept it to facts, because facts don't shake. He was quiet for a long beat that felt like the length of a downpour. "Come by," he said finally. "Bring anything you've got. Emails, expense codes. I've had a bad feeling." The way he said it told me he already knew the shape of the storm. He just needed the map. His den smelled like paper and old coffee. Framed blueprints from '94 lined the walls, the kind of lines you draw when you still love the work. We spread Rico's ledger on the desk and went line by line. 4 hotel charges at the River House. 2 strategy dinners, coded at $1,180 each. A retainer to Red Advisory for $28,000 signed by Tessa. The dates crunched together. Late nights, weekends, the edges where bad choices like to hide. Martin rubbed his temples with his thumb and forefinger like he was trying to press the headache out. "Red," he said. "That name's familiar." He snapped his fingers once, the sound sharp in the quiet. He used to sit on Arc North's deal team. They lowballed me on a buyout in 19. He didn't say the number with bitterness. He said it with recognition. We looked at each other across the paper. If Colin had a foot still planted with a competitor, this wasn't just about cheating or a bad judgment call. It was a setup with an invoice attached. The kind of setup that empties a company and leaves a shell that looks steady until the wind hits it. I forwarded Martin everything. Email threads, calendar invites, the photo I hated taking, each with timestamps, each with the kind of detail I'd want if I was the one getting asked hard questions. He didn't judge me for the picture. He didn't have to. "You did the right thing," he said, which helped less than I wanted and more than I expected. On my way out, Martin stood under the blueprint of the first warehouse he ever built and looked smaller than his age. "I should have never handed her the title clean," he said. "I hoped it'd make her grow up." The words cut deeper because he didn't put a bow on them. I said, "We'll fix it," because there wasn't a softer way to promise I wasn't running. I drove home with the radio off and the road noise filling the cab. The house sat there like a model on a showroom floor, lights off, all angles. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't ask where she was. I took the spare room that night, set my phone on the dresser face down, and pulled the door shut. I walked into the bullpen the next morning and almost choked on it. Tessa stood dead center with her hand planted at Colin's back, like she was presenting a trophy. "Everyone, meet our strategic partner, Colin Red," she said, voice bright enough to reflect off the glass. She didn't glance at me. She didn't have to. The point was made with posture. She kept going before anyone could breathe. "He's an outside consultant, not staff, and he'll be advising me directly." The words landed like a stamp. She gave a little nod to HR like she'd already cleared it, even though I knew she hadn't. Mouths actually dropped. Keegan's did, then Rico's, and even Nadia in HR lost her neutral face for a second. Tessa glowed like she just cut a ribbon on a new wing. Colin lifted his fingers in a small wave that tried to pass as humble and missed by a mile. "Mason will be his point," Tessa added, casual as a forecast. "Get Colin up to speed on our vendors, client histories, and internal documentation." Acid climbed my throat. She said it like I'd been volunteered to carry someone else's bags while he counted our money. I kept my voice level. "We have protocols for onboarding outside advisors." I didn't say please, and I didn't drag it out. It was a fence line. She smiled with all her teeth. "We're moving faster now," she said, and the way she looked past me told everyone whose rules would matter. Per our policy, external advisors only got sanitized packets until legal cleared a non-disclosure. I knew it. She knew it. Half the room knew it. The fact that she said faster, like it was a permit, made my hands itch. The rest of the morning, Colin circled the office like he'd trained for it. He didn't hover. He landed, shoulder to shoulder with Rico at the coffee machine, asking about our standard markup, leaning into Keegan's desk to ask which subs could be squeezed on timelines, pausing by my chair to fish for subcontractor rates we didn't publish. His questions weren't curious. They were probing for soft spots. I kept my face flat and fed him oatmeal. Public brochures, generic process notes, the kind of answers you give a reporter who's only going to quote himself. Meanwhile, I made a list on a legal pad of every specific he hunted for, down to the phrases he used. Rico caught my eye and texted me under his desk. "This guy's digging." I didn't text back. I tilted the pad so he could see the list growing. Around midday, Tessa pulled me into a glass conference room and dropped a freshly laminated org chart between us. The new shape looked like she'd shaken the tree to see what fell. 3 project managers had been reassigned to growth initiatives. My name slid out from operations into a new box labeled Strategic Operations, and under it, in thin type that felt like a knife, Advisor to President C. Red. "I'm not reporting to a consultant," I said. My voice didn't spike. It didn't need to. It was a line in concrete. "You're reporting to me," she said, not blinking. Then she leaned in close enough for me to smell the citrus on her breath. "Don't make me choose, Mason." She said it soft, like it could pass for care if you weren't listening. It hit like a slap. That wasn't about job titles. That was the marriage on a hook. I slid the chart back across the table, stood, and opened the door without another word. I wasn't going to bleed in a fishbowl. She let me go, and I felt the eyes on the glass as I stepped into the hall. After the meeting, I sat on the concrete stairs with Rico, a moleskin on my knee and a ballpoint that had seen better weeks. We went line by line through what we knew. Every expense tied to Red Advisory, each late-night approval with missing attachments, and the approvals pushed through at times no sane person signs off on concrete. I wrote fast and ugly, dates and amounts and initials, and I shot photos of each page as I finished it. The stairwell smelled like dust and cold steel. It woke me up in a way coffee hadn't. Later, Colin drifted to my desk and planted both hands on the edge like he owned the laminate. "Shoot me the Henderson spec," he said. "I want to see the guts." He said guts like he was doing me a favor by cutting to them. "Submit an NDA," I said. "You get the sanitized version until legal clears you." My screen stayed where it was. I didn't swivel to face him. He smirked like we were old friends busting chops. "We're all on the same team," he said. The casual tone was a tell. People who are on your team don't need to say it. Tessa breezed by, perfume first, and tapped my monitor with one manicured nail. "Give him whatever he needs," she said, already moving. She didn't slow down enough to hear my answer. I sent the sanitized packet to his inbox, front-end specs, high-level timelines, nothing that could get us robbed, and looped legal and HR for the record. My email read, "Providing sanitized Henderson packet pending NDA approval," with the timestamp in bold so no one could pretend later. Then I replied on the thread, so it was loud and clear, "Sanitized packet only until legal clears his NDA." And I kept legal on it so there was a copy in a folder I didn't control. He didn't answer the email. He didn't need to. He had what he could get, and I had my cover. The rest would come down to who blinked first. By late afternoon, the office air felt dense and crackly, like the pressure drop before a storm. People worked, but the sound changed. Less talk, more shuffling paper, the low hum of printers spitting out receipts like confetti at a funeral. Nadia walked past my desk with her lips pressed thin and her eyes saying what HR never wrote down. Keegan sent me a message with 3 words. "Tell me when." At 5:40 on the dot, the front door slammed hard enough to ripple the blinds. Heads lifted in unison. Martin walked in with 2 board members, Holden, all jaw and measured voice, and Priya, sharp-eyed and calm like a surgeon. Martin didn't look at Tessa or at me. He scanned the room, took its temperature, and set his stance. "We need to talk," he said to Tessa, voice carrying just enough to leave no doubt where this was headed. He didn't dress it up with please or why now. She laughed, short and dismissive, like the whole world was late to her party. "Unless it's about growth, book it for next quarter," she said, one hand on her hip, the other flicking hair off her shoulder like this was a photo op and not a warning. "It's about survival," he said. The next morning she called an emergency town hall, like she was rolling out a product. She stood on the landing above the bullpen with Colin posted a half step behind her like a security detail. The room gathered because that is what people do when the boss asks. She didn't thank anyone for showing up. She didn't bother with preamble. "We're modernizing," she announced, voice bright and sure. "Some folks won't make the cut." Heads tilted, eyes zipped to me like I had a target painted on my chest. Colin didn't bother to hide the satisfaction of being on the high ground without ever having poured a yard of concrete. She wrapped it quick, no questions, and walked straight down the stairs like a parade grand marshal. She hooked 2 fingers at me and I followed, because public scenes don't help anyone you plan to keep. In her office, she shut the door so the latch clicked and slid a thick envelope across the desk, like a bill I'd forgotten to pay. "We should stop pretending," she said, eyes dry and cool. "Sign these and we can do this like adults." Her tone didn't wobble. It didn't need to. She'd rehearsed. I opened it. Petition for dissolution, already stamped, her attorney's name in crisp font that told me exactly how much she'd spent to make it clean. It wasn't a conversation. It was a decision I wasn't part of. The room went quiet except for the whisper of paper when I turned a page. "You're also being transitioned off your current role," she added like she was offering a parking validation. "Colin will handle operations. We'll talk compensation." She didn't say severance. She said compensation, because that word sounds less like you've been pushed down a flight of stairs. I laughed once, one hard exhale that had nothing to do with humor. The way she stacked it, marriage and job in one neat packet, was so tidy it made me sick. I stood up before I said something I couldn't pull back. "I won't be in your way," I said, and took the envelope. I kept my voice steady and walked out into the bullpen where people watched me like it was a car crash you can't unsee. In the hallway, Martin stepped out of a conference room as if he'd been tracking the weather through the wall. I held up the envelope and he swore under his breath. Not theatrical, just tired. "She's forcing you out to cover him," he said. He put a hand on the door frame like he needed something solid. "We've got the board at 3, I said. "I'll bring what I have." He nodded like a man who knew the next 3 hours would decide how bad the bleeding got. Before the session, I printed emails, ledger pages, and the list I'd made of Colin's questions. 9 pages, numbered in the corner in blue ink. I stuck bright flags on each place where signatures were missing or approvals came at 2:11 a.m. I didn't dress the packet up. I set the story in order and left the adjectives out. At 3, she walked in late, all confidence and clean lines, and launched into a slide deck about agile pivoting. Colin clicked the remote for her and didn't take a chair, like he wanted everyone to know he wasn't here to be comfortable. She talked about innovation, market capture, and strategic speed. She didn't mention 3 clients on hold, liquidated damages on Gardner, or the fact that half our subs had stopped picking up on the first ring. When she finished, Martin slid my packet across to the board like a file handed to a surgeon. I didn't look at her. I talked to Holden and Priya and walked them through it. Not dramatic, just facts. Lost clients. Undocumented approvals at bad hours. Overlapping retainers for services no one could define. A consultant with ties to a competitor who asked for our pricing guts before signing an NDA. Tessa crossed her legs and called it sour grapes, like all this was about me not liking change. Colin smiled with his teeth and called me risk-averse, as if risk wasn't a thing we manage every hour on a site to keep men from getting crushed under beams. Priya leaned forward, pen still. "Where's the NDA?" she asked, and she didn't blink when she said it. Colin didn't miss a beat. He said he didn't have it handy, like NDAs are scarves you misplace. Holden turned a page and tapped a line with his index finger. "Explain the $137,600 wire to Red Advisory labeled Q3 success fee," he said. Success for what? No one answered. The silence sat there heavy and long enough that the projector fan sounded like a siren. I didn't ask them for anything. I told them I was resigning, effective immediately, and they should back up all systems before end of day. "If you want a shot at keeping this place alive, you need a clean copy of Truth," I said. Then I handed Rico a USB with mirrored ledgers and chain of custody notes in an email he could print if anybody pretended later that paper didn't exist. Rico took it with 2 hands like it was live. He didn't say thanks. He didn't need to. He tucked it into a folder and looked at counsel the way you look at a medic when the bleeding won't stop on its own. Chairs scraped. Tessa told the room I was making a scene. I didn't give her the satisfaction of turning. I pulled my badge from my belt clip, set it on the table by counsel's elbow, and said, "That's mine." The plastic hit the wood with a flat sound that felt like the end of a chapter. I walked to IT, handed them my login list, and told them to cut my system access at close of business on Martin's instruction. The guy behind the counter asked if I wanted a copy of my personal folder. "Already pulled what I'm allowed," I said, and signed the form that said I understood my access would die at 5. On the way out, I stopped by Rico's desk and told him, "Mirror everything, including off-cycle approvals. Put a copy with counsel and a copy in a place Tessa doesn't know." He nodded and didn't ask questions, which is why I trusted him with a key when the house was on fire. I passed Keegan by the plotter and told him, "If anyone asks, you're on site tomorrow. Send me nothing." Send Martin everything he swallowed, then said, Be careful. And picked up a roll of drawings like it weighed twice what it used to. Revenge wasn't the point. Not yet. Safety was. If they wanted to keep the building from collapsing, they needed shoring and a clean set. I tightened my grip on the envelope and pushed through the lobby doors into the heat. Security signed me in as a visitor on Martin's authorization. My employee access was already dead. The badge they clipped to my shirt felt like a loaner coat. I came in early to clear my desk, head down, box under my arm. Half the office clustered around the coffee machine, whispering like the steam could hide it. 2 clients had pulled out overnight. Henderson had sent a reevaluate email at 6:03 a.m. The air had that stale charge a building gets when the power blinks and comes back wrong. I kept my eyes on my drawers and started sorting. Pens, a tape measure, the moleskin with the list I didn't plan on leaving behind. I wrapped a photo of the crew at our first ribbon cut in printer paper and laid it flat. Every scrape of a drawer sounded like a shout. Tessa stormed in with her heels hitting the floor like nails. She saw the cardboard box and smirked without bothering to hide it. Colin stuck to her shoulder like a shadow that thought it was useful. Good. The sooner you're gone, the better, she said, as if saying it made the building safer. I set the box down and faced her. Before I leave, you should know Gardner triggered penalties, I said. And Maple and Finch looped counsel. They CC'd an attorney on the last email. Her face tightened a fraction, the first honest reaction I'd seen from her in weeks. She recovered quick. We have it handled, she said, glancing at Colin as if his presence could staple the lie in place. He didn't meet my eye. He was busy scanning the floor like the tile might give up secrets. The elevator dinged and the room shifted like a wind change. Martin stepped out with 3 board members, legal counsel, and Rico hauling 2 binders that looked heavier than paper. Should be. No one clapped. No one needed to. The noise in the bullpen dropped a notch you could feel in your teeth. Emergency board meeting, Martin said. Conference room. Now he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Tessa tried to block the current. You don't have authority to convene this without notice, she said, chin high. Counsel answered before Martin could. Under Section 3 of the bylaws, 2 directors holding proxies may convene a special emergency meeting. Holden lifted a manila folder and showed a signed proxy. We do today, he said. Priya was already moving toward the glass room. Inside, I sat on the edge near the wall, technically a nobody now. But Martin nodded for me to stay. I kept my eyes off Tessa because I didn't trust what my face would do, and I talked to the numbers. Counsel opened with process, then we put pages on the screen, timelines of approvals, the run of late-night wires, vendor overlaps that made no honest sense. Each slide had dates and amounts, no adjectives, the kind of sequence that makes its own argument. Counsel pointed to a hotel folio with 2 names on it, both of them familiar in the worst way. A room at the River House booked under Miss Cole and Mr. Red on these dates, she said. Purpose? Tessa didn't blink. Brainstorming, she said, like a hotel bar was a whiteboard you could sleep in. Priya pulled up a summary she'd had the research team compile. You left Arc North 9 months ago, she said to Colin, voice even. 2 weeks after our retainer hit your LLC, Arc North began courting our clients. She didn't ask it as a question. She set it on the table. Colin's mouth twitched, but he kept the posture. I abide by all covenants, he said. The sentence sounded practiced, like something an attorney typed for him. Holden scrolled, then stopped with a finger on an email header. Then explain why your LLC received introductions from an Arc North partner the same week edits landed on our Henderson deck, he said. I want the short version. His tone didn't give any place to hide. Tessa turned her chair and went at Martin. You set this up to make me look reckless, she said, voice sharp enough to cut. You could have come to me. He didn't raise his head or his voice. You're my daughter, he said. I didn't set anything. You did this? The room held still. The only sound was the projector fan and my pulse in my ears. Counsel shifted to the money that kept me up. Line of credit draw for $480,000 without board notification, she said. Explain the basis. Tessa gave a shrug meant to pass for competence. Routine cash smoothing, she said. Rico stood and pointed to a printed ledger, dates circled in red. Draws occurred the same night's wires went to red advisory, he said. Amounts track within a 1 or 2% spread. It got very quiet. Priya closed her folder and looked at the ends of the table. We need to safeguard the company, she said. Now. No one argued. There was nothing left to pretend. Tessa folded her arms like steel crossing steel. You can't fire me, she said. I am coal-billed. The words hung there, heavy and wrong. Martin flinched like the sentence had weight. He swallowed, straightened, and said, No, the people are coal-billed. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the door where the bullpen hummed under fear. Counsel asked everyone not essential to step out for executive session. Chairs scraped. I picked up my box and walked to the hall, the cardboard digging into my palm. Through the glass I saw heads bend together and lips move. The soundproofing turned the whole thing into a silent film where money and names went by on lips I couldn't read. The hall smelled like carpet glue and old coffee. I set the box on the bench, sat beside it, and watched the minute hand grind. A courier dropped a stack of FedEx envelopes on the console table and looked at me like I might be lost. I wasn't. I was exactly where bad choices drive you, outside a room where your life gets translated into motions and seconds. Keegan slid out of the bullpen, saw me, and didn't ask. He handed me a bottle of water and said, Whatever they decide, the crews will work. His throat moved like the words scraped on the way up. I nodded once. Talking for the sake of noise felt like lying. The conference room door cracked open. Counsel slipped out, whispered to Holden, then went back in. Nadia from HR walked by with a manila folder hugged to her chest the way people carry things they didn't want to own. She said, You okay? And then corrected herself. Do you need anything? I said, I need this to be clean. And she gave one tight nod and kept moving. I could feel Tessa's temper through the glass when her hand chopped the air. Colin leaned toward her, mouth close to her ear, and whatever he said made her jaw lock. Martin stayed still, hands flat on the table like he was holding the building steady. I stood up because sitting made the knot in my stomach worse. I paced the length of the hall and counted the floor tiles to keep from cracking. A maintenance guy pushed a cart past me and paused. You good, man? He asked. I said, I will be, because it was the only future tense sentence I trusted to say out loud. The door closed again and the blinds snapped half shut. Executive session had swallowed the view. I picked up the box, set it down, and then set it down again because my palms were slick. The clock hands moved like they had sand in the gears. Every now and then a voice rose just high enough to leak through, then dropped back under. I didn't want to be here. I had planned to be gone, to put the building and the woman behind me like a work site we'd finished. Instead, I stood in a hallway, waiting to see if the roof would hold. I squared the box under my arm and stepped closer to the door, ready to go back in the second someone waved me forward. The door cracked and counsel waved me in. I set the box on the floor by the wall and took my seat where I'd been, hands flat, eyes on the table. Counsel stood with a printout and read in a voice that didn't waver. Motion. Suspend Ms. Cole as president pending completion of an independent audit, appoint an interim operating trustee, restrict all payments to Red Advisory, and notify senior lenders immediately. Tessa laughed like it was a punchline. You can't suspend me, she said, leaning back with her arms crossed. Holden raised his hand. Priya raised hers. Then another, and another. 4, then 5, then 6. It passed, and the room's air shifted from debate to consequence. She turned on me first, like gravity had pointed her there. You did this, she said, voice low and shaking in a way that made it more dangerous. I didn't raise mine. You did this, I said. It wasn't loud, it was just true, and it landed harder than volume ever would. Colin straightened, found his posture, and aimed his confidence at the table. You'll be hearing from my attorney, he said, trying to sound like a man with a plan. Holden didn't blink. Good, he said. So will Arc North. Counsel slid a letter across the table toward Colin. Demand to preserve all devices and accounts, including personal phones used for company matters, she said. His face didn't crumble, but a shade of color left it like a tide pulling back. Rico cleared his throat from the back and set a fresh page on the stack. There's one more thing, he said, voice careful. He pointed to a bank email printed with headers intact. We received a notice from First Tri-State. An electronic signature in Martin Cole's name authorized a $350,000 increase on the operating credit line. The bank flagged it and requested voice confirmation. None was provided. Every eye in the room moved to Tessa like a magnet had flipped. She didn't get small. She said, "It was a misunderstanding, like the bank had misheard its own system." Martin closed his eyes for a beat that felt longer than a breath. Priya exhaled through her nose and said, "Call it what it is." "This is Fraud Exposure Counsel," looked at me and then at the door. "Mr. Cole, would you step out for a few minutes?" she said. I picked up the box and walked back to the hall, where the carpet smelled like old coffee and nerves. 10 minutes dragged across my shoulders. When the door opened, Counsel's expression had the kind of calm you use when you're delivering stitches. They asked me back in, and Martin spoke first. "Mason," he said, voice steady, "will you serve as interim COO under me as chair while the audit runs?" Counsel added, "For the avoidance of doubt, the board rescinds any acknowledgement of yesterday's resignation and appoints you interim COO, effective immediately." I didn't give a speech. "Yes," I said, "I'll do the job." I stood, walked straight out to the floor, and climbed 2 steps on the nearest ladder so my voice would carry. "Listen up," I said, and the hum dropped. "We're freezing all non-essential spend starting now. We're triaging clients by delivery risk and focusing on execution. If you don't need it to pour, wire, hang, or pay a sub who is on site, it waits. Keegan, I need you in a conference room with client rescue. Rico, cash control in the war room with counsel. Everyone else, you're on delivery. Questions go through team leads. We keep our heads down, and we build." I didn't explain what just happened upstairs. They could read it on my face, and in the way no one looked toward Tessa's office. 30 minutes later, the door opened, and she came out with a cardboard box and Colin glued to her side. She took a slow lap of the bullpen, like she was claiming air, chin up, eyes sliding over people who wouldn't meet them. The office looked at its screens and its shoes and the way out. At the door, she stopped and turned to me with that smile she used when she thought she'd already won. "You'll regret this," she said. "I'll build something bigger in 6 months." I kept my voice level. "Do it clean," I said. She tilted her head and let the smile sharpen. "There's no clean in this business." She walked out, and Colin followed without looking back. I didn't watch the elevator close. I turned to the nearest cluster and started assigning calls. "Henderson first," I said, "then Maple and Finch. We will own what's ours and fix what we can fix." Heads nodded. People moved with purpose that had been missing for weeks. I felt something like a floor under my feet. By 6, the adrenaline burned off, and the building's hum settled into a grind I recognized. I carried my box to my truck and drove home to a kitchen that had 2 coffee mugs in the drying rack and a stack of mail that wanted answers. I sat at the table, opened the thick envelope, and signed where yellow flags told me to sign. My name looked steadier than I felt. I wrote a sticky note and slapped it on the top page. "I'll have counsel respond. Do not contact me off counsel." The pen dug a little too hard into the paper. It felt right. I sealed the packet and set it by the door. Then I called my brother, Luke, who'd fallen off enough times to know what counting days felt like. "I need you sober and on time if I ask you for help," I said. "I'm not playing games." He didn't pause. "I'm here," he said, and the quiet after that sentence did more for me than any toast ever had. I ended the call, picked up the envelope, and walked it down to the lobby mailbox. The next morning I called a full hands in the break area, not the conference room. No stage, no deck, just a battered folding table and a coffee urn that had seen better months. People circled in, silent and wary, hard hats hooked on fingertips. I didn't warm it up. I told the truth. We stumbled, I said. We're going to fix it. If you want out, HR will talk to you today without fear or spin. I let my eyes sweep the room. No one moved. The noise of the fridge cycling was the only sound for a beat, and then Keegan shifted his weight and nodded like he'd decided for himself. I split the room fast before adrenaline turned into gossip. 3 squads, I said, drawing lines on a whiteboard that already had old pizza grease fingerprints. Client rescue, delivery triage, and cash control. Keegan, you've got rescue. Pull 2 PMS and 1 estimator who can do math and manners. Rico, you anchor cash with the external controller Priya tapped for the audit. Treat cash like oxygen and assume the tank's low. I'll take delivery. We will keep sites moving and talk to people like they're grown-ups. We hit the phones. At 9:10 sharp, Keegan and I dialed Henderson on speaker in a glass room that still smelled like last week's dry erase markers. I didn't spin. We blew it, I said. Here's the new timeline. We'll stand up a weekend crew, add an overnight pour if the weather holds, and I'm offering a 7% fee reduction. I will be on site in 48 hours with revised sequencing. The line stayed live. A man on their side cleared his throat, asked 3 hard questions about staging and inspections, and then said, "Send the schedule by noon." They didn't hang up on us. That was the start I needed. I spent the afternoon in hard hats on 2 sites, Gardner first, then the Easton retrofit, shaking hands until my palm ached and owning the screw-ups. I laid out the next 10 days by the hour. Who pours what when, who signs the tickets, who orders the rebar, and when it hits. I wrote it on a sheet of plywood with a fat marker so no one could pretend they missed the email. Men who'd avoided our office for 2 months started making eye contact again. A framer named Daryl squeezed my shoulder and said, "Just tell me straight and I'll show up." I told him straight. At 6:30, Luke showed up in a clean shirt with his hair combed like he was going to court. He stood with his hands in his pockets until I handed him a stack. Courier runs, pickup lists, a new phone he had to keep on and charged, and an envelope of prepaid gas cards. "Need a driver? Need a runner?" he asked, trying for casual and missing. "Both," I said. "You'll hit the permit office at 8, then Maple and Finch for a stamped set, then the bank." He tucked the phone into his pocket like I'd handed him a badge. While we were taping the plywood schedule to the Gardner trailer, Tessa and Colin went loud on LinkedIn with their new venture, Red and Coal Strategies. Slick logo, buzzwords about disruption and velocity, selfies with a borrowed Bentley hood in the frame. Screenshots hit our subs group text in seconds. The electricians roasted the font. One of our masons wrote, "That car rides like a rental." No one at our sites stopped working to clap. They didn't just post. They started a whisper campaign that coal build was broke. A supplier forwarded me a message thread where someone using a new Red and Coal email hinted we couldn't make payroll. I didn't engage. I posted 3 site updates with measurable milestones and photos of the crew. Anchor bolts set on the south wall, slab pour scheduled with inspector confirmation number in the caption, steel delivery ETA stamped by the yard. I tagged the clients and time-stamped the updates so the record wasn't just a pretty picture. 2 days later, Nadia slid into my doorway with her HR face on and a printout held like a hot pan. Someone had dropped an anonymous tip to HR with screenshots of Colin pitching our pricing deck to Arc North's regional head. Our template, our footer stripped, his cursor hovering over our markups like a thief testing drawers. Priya came down in person, read the email once and said, "Formal complaint opens now." Counsel issued a litigation hold before lunch, and Rico started a list of every file touched by Colin's login. The room got the stillness of a storm gathering. Meanwhile, my phone pinged nonstop with vendor calls, voices I respected asking if we'd pay on time. I pulled up the payable stack and started a triage board on the wall. We slotted 186,000 for urgent subs, guys who had crews on site and materials already in our buildings. I pushed 2 large but tolerable bills 30 days with notes on why the delay wouldn't choke the pipeline. Then I called each owner myself, not a delegate, and said, "Here's the date. Here's the check number you'll see when it cuts. If anything shifts, you'll hear it from me first." Some cursed, some breathed. and one said, "Nobody ever calls on time." I said, "Get used to it." In between calls, I met Martin for black coffee at the shop around the corner where they paint over the same chalkboard menu every week. He sat like he'd aged a decade and looked lighter by an ounce. "Do you want the job in the long term, Mason?" he asked, stirring a coffee that didn't need stirring. I wrapped my hands around the cup because it gave them something to do. "Let's get through week 2, I said. He smiled for the first time in weeks, small and real, like muscles remembered how. I ended the day with my boots hitting 2 more flights of stairs because the elevator felt too soft. In the war room, Rico briefed me on cash, while the external controller Priya hired, Diane, hair in a tight bun, CPA eyes that miss nothing, laid out a cash bridge like a battlefield map. "You have 5 days of comfort if nothing else breaks," she said. "We're going line by line and setting approvals to 2 signatures." I nodded and wrote "No orphans" on the whiteboard. No invoice sits without an owner. At 8, Luke texted a photo of 3 stamped permits and a greasy bag of burgers. "Fuel drop?" he wrote. I told him to leave it at the Gardner trailer and go home, sleep, and set an alarm. He replied, 10-4, leaning into the joke like he had a scanner on his belt again. The man was trying. That counted. By 9, Tessa and Colin's second wave hit, posts about legacy systems and breaking what no longer serves. A sub forwarded me a screenshot of Colin bragging in a DM that we were on the ropes. I didn't take the bait. I pushed a second update with a video of Henderson's foreman walking the site with me, pointing at chalk lines and calling out dates, our voices steady and clear. I captioned it with, "Schedule in hand. See you Friday," because sometimes plain is harder to argue with. The anonymous tip turned into a cascade. Blair from a firm we'd crossed paths with twice DM'd Keegan with, "You didn't get this from me," and attached a calendar screenshot showing Colin booked with ArcNorth's ops lead on the same day our Henderson deck got edited. Priya's team added it to the file and sent preservation notices like clockwork. Council's email subject lines went from hold to demand, and I started sleeping with my phone face down to stop the pulse from running my day. Vendors kept calling. I kept answering. I ate cold pizza on a milk crate in the back of the warehouse and worked the stack clockwise: steel, concrete, HVAC, rebar, scaffold. I told a man named Turner he'd have his check on Monday and then called Luke to map the route so the envelope made it to Turner's hand, not a box behind a locked cage. By 10, the building had that late hum I used to love. Printers spitting just a little. A forklift beep in the warehouse. Voices low with purpose. Keegan stuck his head into my doorway. "Henderson wants the revised submittal list at 7, he said. "We'll have it at 6:45, I said. He nodded and left me with the smell of Sharpie and cardboard and a timeline that finally felt like a tool, not a weapon. That night I drove to the house and boxed up the last of my things: 3 shirts I should have thrown away a year ago, a stack of receipts, a mug with a crack I liked anyway. I left the keys in a drawer under the junk mail and didn't leave a note. I carried 2 boxes down to the truck and didn't look back at the windows. The streetlight made the whole place look like a stage set that would fold if you pushed the wrong corner. I moved into a short-term apartment above a nail salon on Vine that smelled like acetone and hope. The carpet was thin and the blinds rattled when the bus went by, but the deadbolt worked and the water ran hot. I set the boxes by the wall, put a mattress on the floor, and opened a window to let the chemical suite out. At 11:20, a text pinged from an unknown number. "You look tired on camera." No name, no emoji. I stared at it long enough to feel the heat rise, and then did what needed doing. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to council with "unknown number," likely harassment, and then blocked the caller. I put the phone face down on the crate I was using as a nightstand, clicked off the light, and slept like I'd poured concrete all day. Half a year later, the building felt different. Not shinier, steadier. The halls had the old hum back, the kind that meant printers were spitting for reasons that made sense and phones were ringing with work, not drama. We'd clawed back Henderson, delivered the Gardner rebuild a week early with $48,000 in penalties waived, and landed 2 mid-market schools that fit us like good boots. It wasn't victory laps. It was breath we'd earned. The audit finished and hit the table with a thud. The findings were worse than I expected and better than my nightmares. Unauthorized spend dressed up as strategic, conflicts that didn't pass a street smell test, and an attempted transfer of proprietary project templates to Red and Cole through a private Dropbox that might as well have had a neon sign on it. We didn't take a victory picture. We took notes. Counsel filed a civil complaint against Red and Cole and sent a demand letter to Arc North to knock off the interference. We didn't posture online. We filed papers, stamped dates, and went back to work, because that's what pays vendors. A week later, the court granted a stipulated temporary restraining order that barred any use of our materials pending arbitration. We tacked a copy in the war room like a posted boundary line. Trespass and you bleed. Word came in through subs and a courier who shares gossip like oxygen that Red and Cole had missed payroll twice and stripped their office to pay retainers. The same morning, Tessa emailed Martin requesting a conversation about my return. He didn't answer, and the absence was louder than anything he could have typed. Around lunch, Blair, Colin's former assistant, showed up at our front desk with a resume, red eyes, and a look that said she'd run out of rope. "He stopped paying me," she said, voice raw. Keegan got her water, and HR got her a chair, and I stood in the doorway because standing mattered. She said, "I kept everything." She wasn't kidding. She handed us a thumb drive with internal Red and Cole invoices that read like a ledger of bad decisions, a term sheet with Arc North for a fire sale of our client list at 30 cents on the dollar, and photos of whiteboard sessions where our bid strategies were mapped with our letterhead torn off and corners still visible. She slid over dates and names without dramatics, just facts stacked like bricks. "I'm done covering," she said. "I need a job, and I need to not feel dirty." We moved quick. Counsel cross-checked the invoices against the audit, looped Arc North's lawyer on the TRO, and scheduled a meet that same afternoon. We settled fast because the facts had weight and the room knew it. Red and Cole dissolved under pressure, like a badly poured slab under a hammer. Arc North's counsel walked away hard and cold, jaw tight, eyes saying they'd fire whoever brought this mess into their house. We recovered $312,000 and got a signed admission of improper use of materials that went into a sealed file I hope my grandkids never open. The stipulated injunction stayed in place through settlement and clawback, which is how we pulled the funds without inviting a drawn-out trial that would have eaten a year we needed for building. We didn't spike a ball. We sent emails to vendors confirming payment dates and updated schedules, and we got a crew out to Henderson to bolt steel like nothing had ever wobbled. Tessa sent me 3 emails in a week, each with a different face. Rage first, paragraphs about betrayal and my company. Then remorse, memories, half apologies that dodged nouns, then bargaining, proposals to co-parent the brand and align our futures. I didn't respond. My attorney did, once, with one sentence. All communications through counsel. The thread died with a read receipt and a silence I didn't fill. Martin asked me again about the future, this time over an egg sandwich at the shop with the chalkboard menu. He wiped his hands on a napkin that left grease smears and said, "I have an offer. Run operations at the trust. We build for communities that always get leftovers, clinics, rec centers, schools no one funds first." He didn't make it glossy. It's not a power move. It's work that matters. I didn't toss it around like a coin. I held it a second and listened to the part of me that had been tired for a long time. "I'm in," I said. "Not because I want to be anybody's hero. Because I want to build without someone turning it into a game." He nodded, and the relief on his face looked like sleep. I walked back to the office and called Keegan into the glass room that never did me any favors. I handed him the COO baton with a hand that didn't shake. "You've got the crews," I said. "You've got Rico and legal. Keep the cash clean and the schedule honest. If you need me, call. If you don't, don't." He stared at the floor a second and then up at me. "We'll make you proud by not making a show of it," he said. That was the right answer. On my last day, the crew rolled in a beat-up sheet cake from a grocery store with "Thanks Mason" spelled wrong and a frosting rose that looked like it had survived a pothole. It was perfect. We stood around in hard hats eating frosting with plastic forks and laughing at nothing big. Rico handed me a folded piece of paper with 3 numbers. cash balance, AR under 30, AR over 30, and a smirk. "Look at that," he said. "We're not dead." I bumped his shoulder and told him to go home before midnight for once. I packed the last junk into a banker's box, 2 tape measures, a dented thermos, a Sharpie that still had life. The bullpen felt like a sight at dusk. Tools away, ground swept, day done. I took one lap, shook hands I wanted to remember, and left my door open because closed doors were part of what made this place sick. On the drive to the new office, the city looked the same. Bridges, brick, trucks fighting for lanes. But I wasn't the same. I rolled the window down, let the air wash out the job site smell ground into my shirt, and let the weight settle where it belonged. The phone buzzed in the cup holder. Luke. "Still sober. Still on time," he said, like a man reporting to a foreman. I gripped the wheel and let the words land. "I'm proud of you," I said. He didn't know where to put that, so he said, 10-4. I clicked my blinker and merged toward the west side. The west side classroom we reclaimed as an office still had a cracked chalkboard we never painted over, and that was the point. First morning, I taped a printout of a community center sketch to the wall with blue tape and stood there a second, breathing in dust and old-school floor wax, and felt more like myself than I had in 2 years. The room had a buzz that wasn't about ego. It was about getting something done with our hands and our heads. The team here was smaller, hungrier, and a little weird in the best way. We didn't do suits. We did boots and tape measures clipped to belts. We talked budget in plain English and argued about line items with pencils, not PowerPoints. We met at folding tables that wobbled if you leaned wrong and drank coffee that tasted like it was brewed in a welding helmet, and nobody complained because nobody had time to. At 9:40, my phone buzzed with Keegan's name. "Henderson renewed for 2 years, he said, sounding like a man who'd just taken a deep breath after holding it too long. "They tried to poach you, too." I laughed because it felt good to. "Tell them I'm spoken for," I said. He chuckled and promised to send a photo later, and then he went back to work because that's what we do. At 11:12, a text slid in from a number I didn't recognize until I opened it. "Can we talk?" "Just 10 minutes, Tessa wrote. I stared at the screen and felt that old pull tug at the part of me that liked fixing things that didn't want to be fixed. Then I typed what I should have typed on day 1. "I wish you well." No contact, I blocked the number and dropped the phone in the second drawer with the tape and the extra chalk. Around noon, we kicked off a workshop with a room full of neighborhood folks, parents, a building super with paint on his jeans, a teenager who'd brought a notebook like he meant business. A grandmother named Laverne stood with both hands on a folding chair and said she wanted a gym that didn't smell like mold and a kitchen where kids could learn to cook without getting in the way of somebody's church supper. That was our brief. That was the kind of order I knew how to fill without lying. We sketched while they talked. I asked about where the afternoon sun came through and which door they used in winter when the wind cut down the alley. Luke showed up to move tables and ended up staying, hauling chairs and asking a dozen serious questions about how we lay out a ramp so a kid in a chair doesn't feel like an afterthought when he rolls into a room full of noise. "What slope lets a grandma push without stopping halfway?" he asked. "What landing gives a kid room to turn?" I ran my finger along the drawing. 1 to 12 on the slope if we can get the length, landings every run, and handrails that don't feel like an apology, I said. Watching him lean in without shaking, scribbling notes like he meant them, I felt something settle. Martin stopped by at the end of the day carrying 2 coffees and a look that said sleep might be possible again. He didn't bring up Tessa. He didn't need to. We stood in the doorway and watched the sun hit the brick across the street, turning the chipped edges orange. "Plywood's up again," he said. "Drywall's flat." I nodded and told him I could get a better price if we took delivery after 3 on Thursdays. We talked numbers like men who were tired of winning on paper. Before I locked up, I took a shot of the chalkboard, smeared with notes like, "Daylight here," "Quiet room by clinic," and "Keep it simple." I sent it to Keegan with the caption, "Build what matters." He sent back a photo of the crew at Henderson in hard hats, faces dirty and smiling like men who'd made it through a storm and were ready to pour again. I could almost hear the rebar chairs clicking into place through the screen. Driving home, I passed the river house. The valet looked bored, flipping his keys and staring at nothing. I thought about the first time I heard Colin's laugh echo off that stone, and how small I felt walking back to my truck. I didn't feel small now. I felt like a man who had done the unflashy thing, showed up, told the truth, protected his people, and walked when staying would have rotted me out from the studs. I parked on Vine, killed the engine, and carried 2 bags of cheap groceries up to the apartment that still smelled like acetone and hope. The hallway light flickered, and the deadbolt stuck for a beat before it turned, and none of it bothered me. I set the bags on the counter and stood there a second, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge and the traffic 3 floors down. The big moves were done. The real revenge was boring. Doing good work, sleeping, paying vendors on time, and making sure the next set of kids learns in a building that doesn't leak when it rains. I pulled out a cracked notebook, sharpened a pencil, and started laying out Laverne's ramp on the kitchen table. Was I right to block Tessa for good? Drop your answer below, and please like and subscribe. It's huge for us and just one easy click for you.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.